So today's Star Citizen Live kicked off. They just posted it to YouTube. So we're going to catch the YouTube video of this. Let's go for it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Star Citizen Live, all about Alpha 314. I'm your host, Jared Huckabee. And if you've never seen Star Citizen Live before, watch another episode, figure out what it's all about. We're just jumping into it this week. We have three esteemed guests, three directors emeritus joining us on the show to discuss all things Alpha 314. Starting immediately to my left, from your perspective, we've got Star Citizen Art Director, Mr. Ian Leland.
Hey everyone, hey Jared.
Down in the corner, we got Angel Eyes, Star Citizen Live Game Director, Mr. Todd Pappy.
Hello.
And
course.
Nobody
JC.
puts baby in the corner.
nobody puts baby in the corner. And directly beneath me, the man who props me up, Vehicle Director, John Crew. John, how you doing?
Hello. I'm doing good, thanks.
All right, so we are talking all things Alpha 314. We're going to jump right into it today. We put a question thread up at the beginning of the week. We collected questions from the Star Citizen backers, let them vote up which questions they wanted to see answered most. We've got a collection of them designed, gathered for our ship people and our gameplay and design people and our environment people, so we can cover quite a lot. Right?
Always remember that when those questions go up, anyone can post them to Spectrum. Be sure to log in, be sure to get your questions in, and go through and upvote other people's questions that you feel suit needs of what you're doing. And you can even answer them. You can reply to them and explain, like, hey, that's already been answered. Here's what's going on with that. So other people don't upvote questions that have already been covered. Like, for example, can I blade my turrets? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Some ships can do it better than others due to computer sizes, but usually manned turrets will be slaved forward if you use them with a bladed system in the future. The pilot can shoot them. They are stuck forward. It is that simple. But that's an example of a question that always comes up, and then it has to be filtered out. And sometimes they are not filtered out. Bad questions make it onto this show. So if you're wondering, why would somebody ask that? That is why. The more you participate, the more you encourage your org mates, your friends to participate, that's when you're going to get quality out of this episodes.
Right off the bat, let's start with something for you, Ian, here. Obviously, the volumetric clouds were a big thing. People have been asking about them in just this show almost every single week for the last year and a half, just no matter what the topic was. Are any of the other Stanton planets and moons getting volumetric clouds with this V1 that comes out in Alpha 314?
So the short and disappointing answer is no, but if we break down maybe why. Originally, Costin and the team were prototyping on a moon or a smaller planet as a starting off point, but it became clear that we just
That was
needed
not
to
my
focus
UI.
on
That was the
Orison
show's
itself,
UI, by the
focus
way, at the bottom of the screen
the
for a
tech
moment
development on that, and just specifically look at that just for this release. So, it was for a particular reason to just focus on one, just because when you're above the clouds or going in the clouds, you can just focus on that. Also, the scale, right? The scale is a unique thing. Also, like part of the conversation as well, like as soon as you put in clouds on a planet or a moon, there's a lot of additional factors that you're going to need to consider, right? Like the occlusion that you'd get from the sun. So there's just a lot of extra stuff that we need to kind of consider. Yeah. So unfortunately, not for 314, but it's something we're looking at for the future.
It's coming.
I appreciate the honesty from the art team. I appreciate the thought that Ian went through, going like, hey, we considered it. We are not able to have fully cloud implementation for 3.14, but hey, here's Orison, and it's amazing, and it's going to look good, okay? But, we don't want to bring your computer to your knees with unoptimized, really cool advanced cloud tech. So it's going to come soon. Expect it in probably 3.14 4.1. He can't make that promise, but I am suggesting that's probably a fair scaling to guess when we'll start seeing more cloud improvements, and over time you'll see even more past 3.14.1.
As we develop the tech further and all that good stuff. Todd, for Ninetales Lockdown, we know from our segment with Ben Dorsey on ISC a couple weeks ago that players can choose to help the Ninetales or help Crusader security on either side of this PvP kind of focused or PvP-centric dynamic event. Is that a choice that you get locked into, or will you be able to change your mind, play both sides, flip back and forth at will, do one time and then do another thing another time? How does that choice actually manifest?
So the choice actually manifests itself based off of if you have a crime stat or not. And so if you have a crime stat, then you'll get the Ninetales missions. If you don't, then you'll get the Crusader missions. If you get a crime stat while you're in the Crusader missions, then you'll get kicked out, and you'll be given the option for the Ninetales missions. And then obviously, if you have a crime stat and you get rid of it during that time, then you should be able to have the Crusader missions.
Right. So there's not a checkbox or some
No,
weird piece of not diegetic UI.
It really is all based off your crime stat. So you clear it, you should get Crusader. You have it, you should get Ninetales.
Okay. John, the Constellation Taurus is coming with 3.14, the last variant of one of our.
Okay, before we go for the Taurus, I am glad to see that the Ninetales Lockdown is tied to your crime stat and crime stat only. That means that you can earn your way to being a good boy again and be able to switch sides. So if you were a pirate and your friends are not pirates, or family org mates are not pirates, if you're jumping around groups, if your org mates are pirates and you want to play with your brother, something like that, and you need to suddenly be the good guy, you can go run missions, you can do bounties, you can, heck, do prison time in some cases, whatever it needs to be to reset that crime stat. And there is a decay now where ships will slowly forget that you attack them. So on the smaller scale, literally in the same operation, you may be able to switch sides over time. And always remember, you can switch servers to immediately decay that remembrance of it being attacked, although crime stat will likely follow you to the other server. So just remember that. Let's jump right into the Taurus.
Original 5 pledge ships. What the hell took so long? No. Does the Constellation Taurus represent the gold standard for the entire Constellation series of starships?
Short answer, no. So obviously the Taurus has been floating around for a long time. There's been many conspiracy theories about what we've been doing with it, and as I mentioned before in previous Star Citizen Lives, it was never going to be like a whole rework of the ships and the lineup. It's simply just spread over that amount of time because it's been a project that we've had on the back burner that we can just put someone on, and when we need to shift priorities, it's the easiest thing that we can pause, move those people on to something else, and then come back to. So it was only ever going to be adding the Taurus.
So again, not my UI.
To the existing lineup.
If you see the YouTube pause screen, that's
that doesn't
mine.
mean
The other, that was
constellations
not
are all going
mine.
to stay as they are. That's not the final version of the constellation. So when we get to the gold standard pass for the constellation, then they will all have that pass we are doing currently on the Retaliator, where we're making sure the metrics are correct, making sure the components are in the right place, at the right height for accessibility. Because if you look at the constellation at the moment, I think there's multiple component hatches on the wall labeled quantum drive. Obviously that's not the case. The Connie doesn't have 2 quantum drives. That's just an art issue. So we'll be going through doing all that, making sure that everyone's favorite seat table combo actually works and you can fit in it, and doing something about the struts. So I know I said in the past that we would look to do something with the struts for the Taurus. We unfortunately
Celebrate
didn't have
the struts.
Yeah, we didn't have time to do the struts and update the pilot seat with all the the new buttons that we require. So we did the pilot seat first, which people will see in 3.14, and then when we do the gold standard pass, we'll touch everything else.
I am shocked they did not gold standard the Taurus out the door. I thought that was honestly one of the reasons they delayed the Taurus. I was defending it for quite a while, arguing that it is not the fault of the rail-in. They're not like trying to strategically deploy the rail-in, get the sales for the rail-in, and then roll right into the Taurus and get the sales for the Taurus. I guess they were just that much delayed in the ship pipeline to get the Taurus out the door. But you just heard it here first. The Taurus will have a gold pass just like the rest of the constellations. And do not use the Taurus as a look at what the gold pass will look like, at least fully. Because you just heard it here that the struts, for example, will not be the same once the gold pass is completed, and some of the text and things like that, even on the Taurus, will face issues. I will say that the Connies desperately need a gold pass standard across the board. The Phoenix is in a special creature of that where you can't even use the bar. I was just joking with Ash yesterday that you can't even use the hot tub, you can't use the bar, you can't use most of the services on the ship. The piano only has one song. This is an example of a ship designed for entertainment and hosting VIPs. Heck, the seats only recently started working again. The business class seats that are to the left of the bar, if you're looking towards the back of the ship, were not functional until recently. So they fixed those, but then nothing else got fixed. The snub fighters recently started working. That was a huge improvement. And the docking mechanism is relatively good to get them back in. But there needs to be a lot of work on the Connies. I've been one of the people who proposed that a long time ago there needed to be an incredible amount of extra armor added to the engine cowlings, because the engine mounts and cowlings were extremely weak, and people could penetrate the shields and literally just pop them off. And then every one of those is 25% of the ship's main thruster efficiency and power. It was very common to see people be able to blast off two of those engines, and then all of a sudden, Connie was virtually dead in the water. It couldn't outrun you anymore. It couldn't really fight properly either, with all of its power only on one side of the ship, aside from small auxiliary thrusters. So just some stuff to think about. I think the Connies are in a bad spot. Over time, I know they'll be fixed. I know they're a CR favorite. I know the ships are beautiful. Heck, the Phoenix is still one of my daily drivers I really enjoy, despite all of its issues. But I can't wait to see a gold pass, and I am surprised to hear the Taurus will be in that gold pass pack, but at least it will get it. So, you're hearing that commitment that across the entire fleet of Connies, there will be a gold pass done, and they will all be brought in line. And that'll increase commonality for people who enjoy commonality of all different kinds, where you want to do science and exploration one day, be a gunboat the next, be a VIP transport, and etc. for another day, and then call the other day. You could, in theory, have a bunch of different Connies, even though most of them are multi-role. I mean, you can squeeze different capabilities out of them. It's a nice touch.
Ian, folks who have followed the project for a while know that our planets and moons often have several biomes that blend into each other. With Crusader being a gas giant and an entirely new kind of planet, does it have biomes? And if so, what are they and how are they sorted?
Let's see. In the traditional sense, biomes, no. Biome implies like it's a different asset pack. Ties into the flora and fauna that you'd expect there. But one interesting part of the development of Crusaders, one of the things that the tech allowed us to do is to have not a variety of visual design spread horizontally across the planet, but we have a variety of visual design spread vertically through. So on the video last night that went out, people could see a slight glimpse of the variety there. So because it's texture driven, we was able to kind of design a format where, like on the very top, around where Orison is, you have some wisps above the player, that catches the light, that gives you that classic skybox vibe. But then if you go down one one step below, we was able to create these kind of like canyons. We wanted to describe the effect of like wind. Wind is the unsung hero across everything to do with Crusader and Orison. It drives everything. So we wanted that feeling where like these winds have stretched the clouds, so you have a kind of a ravine. And then lastly, on the bottom, you can actually get onto like a cavernous space, where you're completely enclosed in cloud, but it feels like you've gone down really, really deep. And then below that, it's the hard deck. From there on in, you're just going into clouds, and then that's where will kind of limit the play space. So in a more traditional sense, no, but actually I think yes, and in the future, Todd and I was discussing that we want that to tie into a variety of play space, a variety of gameplay experiences depending on that depth.
It's kind of like a 7-layer dip.
Well, I think of like a submarine going down into a really deep area.
No, I said a 7-layer dip. We're going to go with that.
A what?
A 7-layer dip. Just like that. The beans. They're the unsung heroes.
A what?
Ian, do you not know what a 7-layer dip is?
I think this is an American thing.
I had a very sheltered childhood.
All right.
So you just heard it again, like we spoke about yesterday with Ash. There will be multiple layers of pressure inside that area. And some ships will be better at this than others, which they didn't mention in this episode, but in previous iterations, devs discussed, like, for example, a Starfarer might be able to handle slightly more pressure due to its ability to work around gas refining and other things, where it may be able to dip a little bit deeper into the clouds than, say, a Buccaneer chasing after it that has a lot of exposed parts and does not built to handle a little bit more pressure. It may actually behoove a industrial or a player that's not having a good time in a PvP engagement to just take the risk and dive into the clouds and embrace the clouds. You may lose them in the clouds. You may lose them literally watch their ship explode around you. I suspect this is something that'll have to be improved over time, but each ship will have a atmospheric intensity that it can reach in the bar system. Ash detailed that excellently yesterday. I highly recommend watching that video that she co-hosted. And the mechanisms here, as Todd tried to steer the conversation into, is it's a lot like submarines. Not all submarines are built to go as deep as others, and that's what he's alluding to there. Ian had a great vision here, keeping the clouds in different places. I didn't think of the winds like he mentioned. I would be very curious if layers change over time with pressures constantly changing. You think of the red eye of Jupiter and other dangerous planets that have pressure intensities, have weather systems. And thinking about it, it makes a lot of sense. I would love to see maybe even events where Orison has to put out an alert and everybody has to run inside because there is some type of storm that is coming up, maybe a pressure differential for only a few minutes or something. Anyway, down the line, that's my speculation hat. Back off. That was just that little bit at the end.
Move along.
Just as Jared said, let's move along.
Couple questions in the live chat about the 890 jump cargo issues. Is there any joy, anything to look forward to in Alpha 314 RE that?
Partial joy, I guess, is the answer there. So the bug is still there.
The answer to so many things. Partial joy.
The
apocalyptic changes and partial joy.
Yeah, that's my catchphrase now.
He
the
has
main
regretted
cargo
saying
group on
that
the
since
rear
day
ramp,
one.
Is still not being detected by the cargo system because it's an item in an item. I think a few other ships have that issue, but it really impacts the 890 because that's its primary amount of cargo. So that's still unfortunately not fixed. But we have actually we found an issue with the cargo in the front hangar where it wasn't actually putting on as much as it was supposed to be putting in there. The cargo, we'd put the right numbers in, but there was a little bit of proxy geo from the hull clipping in and stopping like rows and rows being added to the front. So whilst you're not going to have the full amount, there is a small bump in what you can actually use in the 890 and 314. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I think maybe roughly double what it is at the moment.
I'm glad to see that. And don't forget, the 890 has
Todd,
technically, the 890 technically is still able to take some of the largest land vehicles experimentally. I don't think it's supposed to, but it can fit a tank in that back area. It can fit a two pair of extra small ships in the front or a small ship in the hangar in the front. It has a respawnable medical bed, a battle bridge, and armory lockers on the walls, all on the same floor that you can run back and forth on. I did a video on that. I'll put it on the end of this video, I guess. But when the apocalyptic changes that everybody loves Josh and JC about come out, there will be a moment for the 890 jump to enjoy before the Polaris and the Percy and all these other ships that are designed to really tear these type of ships apart get into the game. And yes, that even includes if the Ares is in the game and it can still do damage, unlike the other small ships that will not be able to do damage to the 890 jumps capital class shields, and even if it's light armor and capital class light hull and such. It will be able to shrug off an immense amount of damage that it currently cannot, and it will be a great capital trainer for small organizations. And yes, even with the Ares, because you can put like a 325A or something like that in the front hangar, and that will give it the Ares certainly a run for its money,
what other
along with the turrets and support.
In IC a couple weeks ago, we talked with Luke Presley about and Ed Fuller about a number of law system improvements that have come in 314. Some because of things we learned in Xenothreat, and some just things that we learned through normal everyday wear and tear and testing. Besides the new surrender mechanic, what other law system highlights come to mind? You don't need an itemized list of everything, but
I got an itemized list from Luke and team.
If you want to.
Removing trespass zones from all underground facilities to planets. So you were no longer receiving crimes for EMPing or interdicting the ship that you're using. So basically, you were getting it off of yourself, or if you EMP'd, then you got a crime stat for yourself. Destroying a party member's empty vehicle will no longer result in a crime.
Yes.
We have updated the prison code interface or code entry interface and prevented it from resetting the code with incorrect attempts. Made a reduction in time to remove individual crimes when hacking. Crime for assaulting a security guard should no longer be given outside of a monitored zone. Knockouts will no longer kill.
Nice.
Fixed an issue where the players were receiving a crime stat for shooting a vehicle as it was destroyed, and then fixed an issue when falling into lower sections of prisons that would count as a escape attempt. And then the other big one that Luke said was basically adjusted splash damage. So in particular for like EMP and interdiction stuff, like if you've done more good than bad, then you shouldn't get penalized for it.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you. Your team did an excellent job. That's a lot of quality of life improvements squeezed in there.
Well, as excited as Luke Presley gets, I can tell. It's like Jonku. I can tell when Jonku's excited. It's like you learn to spot the nuances.
The millimeter of
he was
facial
clearly very excited about a lot of the law system changes coming. Another question I thought was interesting. Can you talk about any ninja changes to 314? Something that doesn't usually appear on patch notes, or things like weapon or ship balance, or just.
Well, I mean, considering I think last patch we fixed over 3,000 issues. So, and before that another 3,000 issues. And now again, with a lot of these things, we're creating them, as we're building the features and building the content,
right.
And then trying to squash them as much as we possibly can. So one of the ones that I want to basically fix is the zoom out on the star map. So making sure that when you start the star map, it's actually zoomed out versus zoomed in. Then
it's a nice little move.
We're looking at trying to fix a lot of the AI issues, in particular them standing on chairs. And the reason for that was it's not necessarily on the AI. It was basically the way that the actor was persistent, and so it would go to sleep when you zoomed out, and It's basically the AI would be unusable, and then as soon as it got woken back up, when you came back in and reloaded, it didn't know what to do. So those are things that I want to make sure we get fixed. And then from there, it's just we've outlined a crap ton of quality of life fixes that we always try to hit. But this patch, I was much more strict on what should be a live must fix, and trying to force these issues in.
Do you think that's obviously? I'm not asking for a date or anything, but but being more strict like that, do you think that's likely to have an impact on when we go live?
When I say strict, it's basically calling out and saying, no, we have to fix this. So from there, it really is a conversation with the directors and the teams. But all I can really do with a lot of this stuff is call it out and say, hey, same with Bayer or our player relations or our player experience team, and as well as other directors and leads. And so we have that stuff called out, and then it's up to us to really go through and say, yeah, we can do this in this time, or this requires an underlying system to be fixed or adjusted, or we're currently working on that, so we're not going to fix it right now because it's a waste of time, as soon as that new feature goes live, kind of thing. So it's those constant balance changes that happen, within our development system. So, but I mean, for the changes and stuff like that, like John can tell you, like, I mean, even just for the missile mode, I think they've done one pass, and then they expect to do multiple passes, for that. So, I mean, that to me is kind of ninja changes, that people would not necessarily see or know. Same with the AI and a lot of the mission stuff too. Like there was a lot of rework that Elliot did, for some of the base missions. But again, the player might not necessarily see those. So some of it's just quality of life, and hopefully, it just feels smooth and it's not immersive breaking, and then, so the player doesn't notice it.
Gotcha. Ian, what was the hardest challenge the art team? What was the hardest challenge the art team faced when bringing Crusader to life as a gas giant? Let's do it for Crusader and for Orison, because those had to be two very different challenges.
All right. It turns out making a gas giant's hard, right? Yeah. Well, let's see. So we started off by seeing how far we could get with the current tech. I think the last time I spoke with you, Jared, we was like, okay, we'll see what we can do. Abuse the rules, see what we can happen. I think we got pretty far. We showed it to Chris, and Chris was like, nope, we're missing the volumetric clouds, right? So, the focus then turned into the volumetric clouds. But whenever you create something for the first time, it's always hard because it's the first thing. You've got to go through that process of trial and error. So, with something like the gas giant, instantly the scale was the hardest part. And for example, like the radius of Crusader was, I think it's about 7,500 kilometers radius, right? And for example, like Stanton 1's like 1,000, or one of the moons is maybe 300. So it's it's considerably larger. So with that scale, and when the player flies in, you come up with a design, and then you fly into it, and you don't see anything move. So instantly, that scale became the first thing that became a concern. And then second is just, we've never made a gas giant before, and it's you can look at fantastic satellite imagery, but we wanted to do something that was a little bit different. Chris had a very specific look in mind for Crusader that we wanted to achieve. And remember, like I said, like that sort of feeling that wind has blown these clouds over the surface, so we wanted a particular look. So then the tech develops, and then by Carsten, and Seb did a fantastic job as our principal tech artist of being that communicator between the art team and the tech team and translating what features we'd need and how the tech works. So like I said, there's a lot of trial and error there. But then, once you start doing look development, you start getting something. But there was one day, okay, it was like, cool, this is working. And then Jake, who's previously been responsible for the previous space gaping near the gas pockets and stuff in the game right now, and he just had a little play, right? He just was very curious. He took the tech and then he tried something out, and instantly it was like, that's Crusader. He hit it. The man was talking about the layer in. He just tried something out, and we all looked at him. It was like, that's fantastic. So Seb kind of took it from there and stabilized it, but it was quite a difficult journey just because it was the first thing for the game, and it's brand new tech, right? So I kind of see it where where we are, where we were a few years back in terms of planets. If you look at how they've developed and grown and increased in fidelity, it might maybe give a good example of where we are right now with this new bit of tech. And then for Orison, this is a classic example of taking a concept art that you look of and go, oh, that's just going to be the best. That's the best. Like, Orison was always my favorite of the Stanton locations. Or like, I fell in love with Orison a long time ago. I looked at the concept art, and guess what? We put that block out in game, and it was like, this looks horrible. Horrible. Turns out a floating lattice work in the sky with thin struts doesn't translate well from concept art to game. So it tested us as a team. It tested us, but
Just a reminder that BioShock Infinite nailed this, but you often did not see the bottom of the locations. Then they had ground added and all sorts of other whimsical factors, which these guys did not have the opportunity to be able to put in. The men and women that put together Orison had to make it believable, both for when you're on the ground in it and also when you're flying in or approaching it via shuttles.
I think I speak with everyone on the team through hard work, passion, dedication, just trying ideas, trying things. What we ended up with is we're quite happy with.
Yeah, I remember, I sit in on those Tuesday reviews, every week, and I remember a year ago the first early tests of Orison and this lattice work that you were talking about, and going, I don't know how he's going to do that. That didn't look like it's working.
Yeah. It was a definite. Okay. This is like, we had to fight for every win on Orison. It was, although we came with the experience of making previous LZs and previous modular locations, it tested the team to the fullest. But I think they did a fantastic job.
John, let's see. Does the missile operator mode, along with the guidance and control rework, mean that co-pilots are going to be able to aim and fire missiles in any or all of the ships in 314? What's the extent of this? I also understand that capacitors have changed a little bit since we talked about them in ISC, so maybe we want to jump into that as well.
Yeah. So missile-wise, the intent is, yes, that co-pilots can use them. Certainly, from my testing personally in the Ivakati one, there are plenty of ships there that will. Pilot can be flying along using guns. Co-pilot can be there using missiles. So that really, probably for the first time, gives co-pilots something to do rather than just being sat there and looking at things. The intent is also for them to be able to control capacitors, but there is some sort of technical hurdles we're working through there. So I don't know if we're going to get that in for 314, but that's certainly the longer term goal. But missiles, definitely yes. In ships where there are co-pilot seats, you will be able to independently go into missile operator mode outside of the pilot and trade sort of control of these things. To sort of touch on the ninja changes question as well earlier, people look at the oh, missile operator mode is just a way to control missiles. Capacitors, or it's just an extra layer. Those things have necessitated us to change and rebalance every single missile in the game, every single weapon in the game, all the ammo counts for every weapon, every single shield, the default loadouts for every ship, the hit points for every ship, the maneuverability of every ship. So they are huge, wide-reaching changes. So 314 is going to be a vastly different combat landscape to 313, and obviously with things of that magnitude, they are going to be iterated on in future patches because we're not going to get the balance right out the gate for the magnitude of ships and component possibilities out there. Same for radar and scanning. So we have like this new HUD, missile operator mode, capacitors, radar and scanning, and then all these other balance changes. There's a lot of big features at work there in 314 that they're going to take a while to bed in, and the beauty of this project is that the people playing the game can help us dial that in, because there's only so many of us, there's only so many QA, things will slip through. You guys are great at finding them in PTU, and hopefully we fix as many as we can before live.
Caught a lot of major changes there for ships, like we've talked about, especially capacitor changes, missile changes, capacitor, aka power management, not being available to co-pilots correctly, but missiles will be across most of the ships. But this is nice improvements. He's dancing around whether the armor changes will be in, weapon changes will be in. We'll see if they make it in. And just how much of a major change that will be without those said things. But definitely the 33, 33, 33 power triangle will be far more useful. And having, be able to switch to propulsion and shields, for example, in a hauler may actually be the difference between you crashing or landing during a hard landing at a technical location, or outrunning the enemy by keeping your afterburner on slightly longer. So players will need to think about if they want to be aggressively stanced on their power, or defensively, or focused entirely on just getting away from a threat, or from trying to get as much productivity as possible.
And after I said it, I don't know why I combined the two, because they had nothing to do with the part. You've covered the missiles and the balancing and stuff. Let's talk about capacitors and how capacitors have changed. On the roadmap, we saw that they were rebranded as PowerManagement V2 and stuff like that. So where is that system at now? What can people expect when this shows up on PTU?
So fundamentally, the base system is still there. Capacitors are a thing. We haven't got rid of them. They are there. But in the review process, we sort of looked at it all and went, capacitors are really just the new bit that's been added. What you're actually doing now is you are managing your power and your energy. Anyone that's sort of familiar with real world plane dogfighting or sim dogfighting, it's all about energy conservation and using that to your advantage. So what we've done is, rather than capacitors be this separate entity, we've merged them into the power triangle. So the power triangle in previous patches never quite worked how we wanted it to work, or how players thought it worked. So to give a very simple, quick answer for that, all the items on your ship wanted X amount of power. So the power plant would go fill them all up as much as it could first, based on a completely separate priority list to what's on the power triangle. And then the power triangle would dictate what's left over. So if your items had all the power they needed, moving the power triangle around did nothing for them anyway. It was sort of just a false advertising. And you pushed all to thrusters, but if your thrusters had enough power anyway, it made no difference.
Yep.
That is completely gone now. So the power triangle in 314 directly controls the capacitor assignment. So you are dictating where this capacitor is expending the energy available to it. So if you put it in the middle, so if you want to play the game without capacitors at all, you can. You don't have to manage it. You can just leave it alone, fly as you did in 313. You'll still be able to partake in combat and do things. But if you come across someone who's actively managing it, you're going to be at a disadvantage. So it's there for giving players extra depth. And I can't remember what we showed in the ISC a while back about it, but it is the three states. So you have your boost, previously known as afterburner. So rather than gating your boost by heat, it's now gated by the capacitor. Heat is something we want to be a long-term consequence, not the limiting short-term consequence, because if it's a short-term consequence, there is no long-term consequence for it, because you're having to get rid of that heat quick enough to allow you to get back into the gameplay. So heat is a long-term consequence now. The capacitors are the short-term consequence. So that controls how much boost you have and how quickly it can regenerate. On the weapon side, energy weapons now have essentially a regenerating magazine, so you can't just hold down your fire button and let them fire forever. They will fire, they'll deplete their magazine capacity, pause for a second, then regenerate, and the capacitor itself controls the speed of that regeneration. You can also turn on and off your energy weapons to increase the pool available to your energy weapons. So a good example would be, say, the Super Hornet, which has a lot of guns on it by default. At the moment, that will split the capacitor between all those weapons. So if you turn a few off, the ones that are left will have more and also recharge quicker. So you've got some trade-offs to make there. And then the last one is shields. And shields sort of behave how they did previously, because they had that behavior built in where they would go down, pause, recharge, go back up again. But what we've done in addition to that, aside from all the rebalancing of the numbers, is all the fighters have bubble shields, which is something we used to have pre-Alpha 3.0. So you, rather than having 4 faces on your shield system, it is one all-encompassing shield face. So no matter what direction you are being hit from, it's all getting hit on one face essentially. And then larger ships have the 4 faces, so you can manage your directionality, which you don't have to do in smaller ships. So yeah, it's still there. It's slightly rebranded because we wanted to sort of take the emphasis away from this new thing that's being added and put it onto you're managing the whole system of power rather than just this one little thing. So there's a huge amount there. There's a huge amount to play with. You don't have to play with it if you don't want to. If you find that side to come in, I just want to get in my ship and fly, that's fine. But for those combat players and PvP players, I think they're going to really enjoy it, because there's lots of nuance there between, do I stick it in the middle? Do I put it into the thrusters to recharge my boost quicker and then take it back out to put into weapons to do a big alpha strike and then take it back, put into shields? There's a lot of fun things there.
Cool.
So, once again, we are seeing the evolution of capacitors. I do not like that they've rebranded it literally a year in, pushing capacitors, and then the last millisecond before 3.14, days before they release it, oh yeah, we're rebranding it PowerManagement V2. That's really, really a weird thing they did. I understand why they did it. I understand the classification being part of a larger idea, but that's a terrible idea. But anyway, the triangle impacting your short-term gameplay and then heat management being on top of that. And then also snuck in there something I didn't realize. They're changing shields, big time changing shields. Where JC just said small ships, such as fighters, will no longer have to factor in shield facing. So that means that, say, if somebody's been hammering on your left side of your shields, even though you might have an incredible amount of shields on the ship, like a Super Hornet, like as an example you used, some type of heavy fighter like that, or maybe even like a Vanguard or something like that, like a super heavy fighter, you will not have to refactor the shields or have to spin the whole ship to keep a shield face that's strong in front of the enemy. It's just a matter of a overall bubble, as he describes it, that is surrounding the ship, and as long as it has shields left and it's not starting to fall apart, there you go. So do factor that in, that that's a nice little stealth buff to smaller ships. and it's probably a conciliatory thing because they're about to nerf the heck out of them with weapon sizes. So if you have only a size, what do I mean by that? If, just a reminder, if you have like a size 1 or size 2 weapon on board, you will not be able to damage, say, a Starfarer or a Retaliator with such a weapon. It is not going to do basically anything to that ship. No matter what its paper DPS or alpha is, it will not be able to actually penetrate and do damage to that ship's armor and hull, especially, and possibly not even any damage to its shields, if not a very reduced damage to its shields. This is something to bear in mind. Ships that have size 3, size 4, even size 5 weaponry will be more important. And how many of those weapons, how much DPS and alpha do they offer? Because even if it's less, that will be more valuable. But they will gain, these small ships will gain the fact they don't have to factor in shield facing. You just heard it here from JC. Their shield will be surrounding them, and every side of their shield is effectively a strong side at all times, as long as the shield's still up. So it will become a gameplay of getting a large buffer or a shield that can outcharge the enemy's damage it can do on a heavy fighter. This is a very interesting development.
Question in chat. Jared, can you make John Crew laugh? When are we getting the... how about that Orison shuttle, John?
Oh, that's not going to make me laugh. That's just going to make me angry.
Well, we're finally getting it, John. Yeah.
That's what I just heard.
I talked to the artist who did it, and he was not up for making it on the vehicle team.
I've got a John had a great ninja commit in for 314. I've got a slightly better one. A new high-tech payment terminal. You know, the fine terminal? It's coming.
Now, I covered that on ISC. I covered that in a sprint report in episode 314.03 this year.
I said to
this
Corey,
quarter.
now's the time. Now's the time. Let's get it in.
I did it.
I love this subtle
Todd,
little nod, but shake of his head by Todd.
Is there any benefit to surrendering to law enforcement, such as like reduced sentencing or anything? Why would you want to surrender as opposed to just fighting to the death?
It's basically laying the framework in the future. Now, no, essentially you don't die, but in the future you won't die, as well as basically you won't lose as many things as you would have before. So it is down to be done, but it's not there yet.
Okay. Will radar scan?
Hey, let's slow this down. That's why you watch this, right? They just they just gutted surrender tech for 3.14. Hopefully at 3.14.1 or 2 or something like that, iterations in the future, it will be back. But they just said they gutted surrender. What we heard from devs just recently was, oh, you will surrender, you will get reduced sentencing if you surrender. And then just literally yesterday, Jared was reading what I thought was a quote or part of his script that said, surrender tech will allow you to save yourself and your ship. So that, what Todd just said, explains the save yourself aspect of not dying, and then you don't have health insurance implications and losing gear implications. But also, I made the position yesterday with Ash that basically you will lose your ship in the process of this happening. That's just as bad as it blowing up right now, because you go to claim it, you can only start the claim process once you leave prison. Now, they have made changes to Mobi-Glass for 3.14. We don't know if it's going to make it in. I guess if we continue to watch, we'll find out. But they're trying to bring Mobi-Glass iterations for the ASOP terminal that allows you to queue up your ship. Right now, if we're sitting in Lorville, we just died or had to respawn because we're stuck, or many, many other reasons. If we want to fly anywhere, have to go over to the spaceport via train. It could take a few minutes to get there, and only once you get to the ASOP terminal in the center of the spaceport can you start the process of claiming a damaged or destroyed vessel or a ship that's stored somewhere else, and you just want to put a claim in so you can start using it in Lorville instead of Lagrange point 3, random station somewhere. So that's something to remember. We are kind of at a turning point here. With surrender mechanics, it was meant to be that you would surrender, your ship would not be destroyed. And then the idea is once you serve your reduced sentence, you would be able to immediately queue up said ship because now you're a free citizen. Your ship was not destroyed. It was simply impounded. Maybe you have to pay a fee, maybe a small fee or something. Or maybe insurance covers that as long as it's insured. I don't know, I'm just speculating there. But you get your dang ship. Now, what you're hearing here is that if you surrender, there's no upside. You might as well just try to run away or fight or something, and then go down swinging or, go down being chased. And you might get away. But that is an important distinction. Hopefully, with the Moby-Glass change, you will be able to at least start the process of claiming your ship while you're sitting in prison. Just because you're in prison doesn't mean you don't exist. And then you can reduce your sentence further by mining rocks or attempting to escape on your own, incurring yet another crime stat, but that's a topic for another day. And then have a friend pick you up and then go get your ship, which is ready to rock as soon as you get to the nearest ASOP terminal. So just some thoughts. That's unfortunate. That's a real unfortunate miss for 3.14, especially after Todd said I'm trying to hit all these different quality of life improvements. And that was going to be a major quality of life improvement for anybody who's ever purposely or accidentally ended up with a crime stat or ended up with something illicit on their cargo and wasn't exactly in the best position to just run or fight.
Scanning and ping be affected by things like asteroids, terrain, or other obstructions?
So with the ping, it's really going to be affected off of the EM and IR. So if you have the EM,
translation ground clutter is not going to impact it yet.
If we took, let's say, Yella's asteroid ring or something like that, and there was a fair amount of EM or IR being put out of those, then the ship could basically hide in those because it's creating a large enough ambient signature for the ship to be able to hide in or hide behind, kind of thing. So it will really depend on how we set up our celestial bodies. But as far as just pure terrain, no.
Okay.
The masking side as well also applies to ships as well. Like if you have an 890 and a bunch of small ships near it, you might not even be able to target those smaller ships because the 890 is emitting such a large signature. They won't show up on radar. You won't be able to target them. You won't be able to get a missile lock on them. So you've got to sort of play with the system there. You get some ways to tailor sort of your radar scope so you can focus in to do that. You can get closer. You can spread those things apart. So yeah, there's a lot of extra sort of incidental gameplay coming from those systems as well outside. And then obviously environments stack on top of that. So that's all amplified, or whatever the reverse of amplified is, in a gas cloud where everything is harder. So going into a gas cloud, you're no longer the case where you're going to be locked on the enemy's targeting. You'll probably lose that lock because they won't be able to actually keep their signals high enough to track you.
One more question for Todd before we move on. If we did add the Orison shuttle as a player controllable vehicle, Todd, how would you imagine it be used in the verse?
They won't do that.
It's super combat heavy. It's troop deploy, kind of thing. But instead of dropping them off, it just crashes.
Ian.
Something tells me there was a lot of experience about this dang shuttle. They all are not happy with trying to get this shuttle to function correctly. I'm guessing due to AI needs, and it probably keeps crashing into everything based on what we're hearing. Real fast, the clouds on Orison are pretty static despite what we're hearing about winds. So you might from above see a lot of wind look and wind sweeptness, but From what we've seen from real world probes that have flown over gas cloud giants and such, they've had to use time lapse photography in order to really see any movement of these clouds. These clouds on a gas giant are just so large. They're like continents moving through the air. So just bear that in mind, that when JC's saying, you're going to have trouble clocking onto each other, you're literally going to be like in a soup, almost like, almost like a sea of water, well, some cases, maybe even water vapor. I don't know what Crusader's composed of yet. We're going to have to find that out. That'd be a fun episode to do some studies on with scientific tech, like in the Reliant Sen equipment. But what we will see is you won't just have a cloud that runs away from you. It will be entirely plausible to keep your systems minimally online and VTOL and just literally sit there in coupled mode and just sit there. And literally the cloud isn't going to move like enough where it'll matter until the person loses interest or something like that. As long as you get lucky and they can't find you, you'll be fine. So just something to remember is that those clouds are going to be pretty static type of gameplay. And very exciting stuff. And I thought this was interesting that JC mentioned something really interesting about the EM radius and IR of a large ship is so large it can actually overwhelm your sensors, and you'll have to spend a lot of effort and redirect and such to lock on to the smaller ships. I never thought of that the escort ships could actually be protected by the ship they are escorting. So in theory, when a 890 jumps, armor, shields, hull is improved, like we described earlier, it is entirely plausible that you would want to send the 890 directly at the threat, unless it has torpedoes or something, and physically almost ram the incoming ship, distracting its sensors and forcing it to spend extra time to be able to lock onto your escort vessels or vessels. And buying your boys time to be able to take down that enemy before they could even target you. That is very exciting stuff.
What did not make it into the first iteration of Crusader that you still want to implement in some later iteration?
For Crusader or Crusader and Orison?
Let's do Crusader and Orison. They only said Crusader, but let's do both.
Okay. Well, let's see. Probably the biggest one is probably movement. See, I always wanted this feeling like it's like an evolving landscape, and we always talked about the idea that it'd be cool to, sometimes you go to Orison and you're just in a cloud, right? Or other times it's nice and open. Obviously, the focus was on the core version of that tech. Movement is obviously like an adaptation of that tech. So it's a shame it didn't make the first release, but it's something we're looking forward to in the future. Performance is going to be ongoing, but also that in combined with quality, with crazy, crazy drops of tech like this. Obviously, it takes years, right? It usually takes years, and it's very rare that people get to see tech so early in development. So quality and performance, seeing those two increases obviously will be coming in soon. Also, lighting and player interaction, more complexity there. So like I said, the analogy I gave for the gas giant, it's the first one. We're going to have many more gas giants in the game, but we'll see this improve. So it's going to hopefully follow a similar sort of like evolution format of what we've been doing with our planets. Yeah.
Regarding the Crusader aspect as well, like right now, Ian had talked about before, like we have kind of a no-fly zone. Now, eventually, the idea would be that there's not necessarily a hard deck. It's really kind of what your ship allows, how much pressure, atmospheric pressure is associated with it.
Yep.
And so that's one of the things that I think Dan's team, or I know Dan's team is currently looking at and starting on. So eventually, that will be released with basically the gas giants.
Okay. Ian, you bring up a really good point I want to touch on about the about how with Star Citizen, one of the things that separates us from almost every other project out there is how early people tend to see things in the development process, and we show a lot, far more than anybody else, but we still work to hold things back and preserve things when possible. All this quarter, Reddit, Spectrum, YouTube comments have been like, "Show us the clouds, show us Orison." And like, we've been holding that back, specifically for the experience that people had yesterday when ISC went out. It's like if you had seen clouds every single week from as they were evolving and stuff like that, that would be cool in one regard, but we would be sacrificing that wow experience we had yesterday. So we're always, and we wanted to try to preserve that for the PTU. I was hoping PTU would be out so players could experience it there, but schedules happen. But we try to balance that. We're always balancing between showing everything at the earliest possible state, and so there's no discovery for our players anymore, versus our need and want and our desire to maintain open development and show things that week after week. So it's always a delicate balance, and there's always people who wish we would show more and show it earlier, and there's always people that would wish we didn't show and let them discover it in the game. And it's always a balance. Orison shuttle, no. If Orison suffers a power failure, will it fall into the planet's core, or will it be fully buoyant? Not only did somebody ask this, it got voted up. Who wants to take it?
Basically, it would sink. I mean, that's the idea, is that anything there will sink.
Okay. Will we see in-game whales flying around Orison?
Not for 314. Basically, they've
Sorry, Ash, we're gonna have to wait.
But basically, the downstream teams like AI.
It's basically become an inside joke between us.
Both
Both the whale costume, the statue.
So it will come out later, but it's not going to be for 314.
That's unfortunate.
For everybody that's talking about the audio, we haven't changed the audio levels once during this entire show. There's something going on with the PC. It's altering my audio levels. I can't troubleshoot it live during the show. Sorry, guys. But letting you know, you can stop mentioning it in chat.
Mic.
We haven't changed it or touched it once during the show. It is varying on its own. I'll look into it afterwards. John.
That's when you need an audio engineer on staff.
Is there going to be a difference in power management, capacitor management between single-seater and multi-crew ships, either in 314 or beyond?
In 314, no. It is the same interaction, managing it by the triangle between small and large ships. However, it's not like one item across all the ships. Every ship has its own set of capacitors. So for 314, we're not letting you change them, but we do want to do that in the future, so you can sort of upgrade them and have some pros and cons. But for small and large ships, it is the same system. It does have varying different things based on the size of the ship, just because some ships multi-crew ships tend to have more things on them, so adjusting it will have a different experience, but the core interaction is the same. And down the line, when we have like multi-crew and capital ships, then I would expect those larger ships to not really deal with the capacitors too much, because it'll be a more in-depth engineer turning systems on and off rather than moving a triangle around.
Gotcha. A couple questions related to the new canvas sliced ship HUD here. Will the new canvas sliced ship HUD allow players to see the HUDs and MFDs of other crew members on a ship? Right now, other players appear to just be looking at blank or placeholder screens that don't reflect the status of the ship. I know this is not only important for immersion, but it's also really all the machinima makers really want this. So.
Yeah, you should be able to see the HUD, because that is a new system done with building blocks. You won't be able to see the MFDs because they are still sort of flash scaleform based, so they are turned off intentionally as a performance compromise. When they are converted to building blocks, then we'll look at turning them back on again. They might still cull out at a distance just for optimization reasons, but I'd imagine when they're the new building blocks based ones that you'll be able to see not only them but also being able to use them.
That's a fair compromise. Jules from Division's team, camera crew, he really would appreciate that. There's a lot of things that we've seen with Machinima making that are compromises for gameplay, but when it comes to shooting the video, being able to just get close and have somebody with a screen is very valuable.
Sort of from a third person perspective.
In episode 2, you'll actually see
Building blocks is the
you'll see
gift that keeps on giving.
the crew of the Honey
Will
Badger
the new
pulling
HUD
out their
allow us
Moby
to
glasses
adjust the
and taking a
colors
look at them
on our
to
own?
show their identification
Right now.
in episode
Not
2.
in 3.14. So in 3.14, we've put what we call the generic HUD across all the ships, and that has a manufacturer influenced color scheme on it, and I think we've shown on ISE.
Yeah. And that's something
Aegis
Twig and Eddie did a
Style
few
1
times
and
over the course of
options for the
Divisions
Drake 1. So in time,
already.
those manufacturer ships will have that sort of style applied to them, and all the other manufacturers will get there. And then once we've done that, then we'll look into customization. I know there's I don't know whether we want to let people pick them all like completely, but I do want to make sure that there is sort of colorblind support for the HUD as a whole. So that
Very
level of
cool.
it will be included at some point.
It's for Ian or anybody, I guess. How do you expect Crusader and Orison to evolve through later patches? We've talked about improvements to the clouds, but all these landing zones have grown. Like the first version of Lorville, and then we had the CBD later on. Same with Microtech and stuff. How do we? What's the roadmap look like in general for Crusader and Orison?
You want to take it, Todd, or do you want me to go?
I'm fine with taking it. So basically, with V2, we have a fair amount. We have three different shops that we're focusing on, and then we've got a thruster experience. We've got like a whale tour experience that will happen as we roll out. But the whale tour obviously won't be turned on until we actually have the whales. Otherwise, it's going to be a really crappy tour.
Like most whale
we
tours in
have, things like
the East
building
Coast,
materials,
they don't
that
really show whales.
some of the Montreal guys are working on, which
Unfortunately, you never
this
see the
will
dang
feed
whales.
into actually all of our landing zones, and allow us to have FPS experiences or missions within major landing zones that just aren't, hey, go deliver this fruit, to the person over here kind of thing. But that's really kind of one of the mandates that the Montreal guys are working towards right now. So those to me are kind of how those things will change, because we want the player to be able to go into the islands and be able to go into the bowels of those islands and actually have missions in there, and whether it be repair or clear out or take over, that kind of stuff. So attack and defend, and then the other thing is that the barges that were created, being able to do combat on those or being able to do missions on those are another thing that we'll be looking at.
Interesting.
And as I guess a natural extension of that, has there been any
Not a mecha
discussion
whale, by
about
the way.
additional
To the rumors and the
POIs
Reddit
besides
jokes.
Orison
The
on Crusader? Is
barges
there
are just
anything else
barges.
on Orison, or did Crusader just build Orison on Crusader and then?
So the focus is exclusively on Orison. That's like the major landing zone on that gas giant. But what's interesting, right, is
Also, point of order, Crusader did not build the original construction facilities. The UE Navy support systems did. And then Crusader ended up getting the rights to it, or they got the contracts to build them and such. It was like all under UEE supervision. And eventually, Crusader was able to buy the planet once Stanton started getting sold off to the highest bidder to the planetary systems, to different companies. Uh, just minor little note there. And the designs were retrofitted for the Herc and the MSR, etc.
We remember what I said right back at the beginning, like building Orison was hard. It came with its own challenges where on previous LZs, you had terrain for the player to land on and get out and, experience the location. Whereas, you know, um, we didn't really have that option there. So right from the very early stages, we were like, and it's kind of like listening to the community as well. It's like they don't want restricted areas. They want to make those decisions. So right from the get-go, we're like, how do we make this so it is almost exclusively open for the player? So when you look around Orison, the entire stretching of it, I think there's 2 restricted areas, and they're around the commercial area and the industrial platform, just because the social space is right. It's to stop griefing, but everything else is open. So to answer your question, it's basically when you look at the lattice work, think about it as like a hierarchical OC system, whereby, okay, it's a habitation platform, and then within that habitation platform, you have the buildings, and then within those buildings, there's rooftop OCs, and there's going to be the building interiors that Todd mentioned before. So the way in which we've built it, if we wanted to create, think about it as like a hierarchical OC system, whereby, okay, it's a habitation platform, and then within that habitation platform, you have the buildings, and then within those buildings, there's rooftop OCs, and there's going to be the building interiors that Todd mentioned before. So the way in which we've built it, if we wanted to create sister platforms or additional platforms or additional locations in the future, those OCs they're already made, right? And and if when people do get to fly around Orison, one of the reads I really wanted is, I want to be out on a lonely platform in the middle of nowhere. So it feels like, if you think about how big this guy would be compared to other LZs, like you could be on an industrial platform way out in the distance, and it would feel like you're looking at Orison in the distance, if you know what I mean. It was an early look we wanted to achieve. So, and answer your question, initially no, but we've kind of done the hard work to do that setup already.
And I mean, we've talked about things are scattered around Crusader, so that they're on others, complete opposite sides of the planet, so on and so forth. So those are things that we will be looking into and trying out. But like Ian said, we have the base now, for these things to be built off of.
One thing I didn't say before, Todd gave a very serious answer about what didn't make Orison, but we didn't get the golf course. Maybe if it gets enough requests, maybe one day.
I'll happily sacrifice the shuttle for the golf course.
I was gonna say I didn't do that one. That wasn't on me. Ian did that one. John, with all the work that's gone into revamping the radar, the scanning, the ping and stuff like this, does any of that affect? Does any of that get us closer to having the improved abilities of ships like the Terrapin or the Carrack and stuff like that? Is this a step forward to that, or is this completely separate, divorced from that?
I'd say it's a step towards it. In 314, we're not specifically focusing on those ships having their superior radar and scanning abilities. Our focus is getting all the ships working to a state where we're happy with this new system, and from then on we will start tailoring those ships to it. Because I think myself and everyone would probably be happy to have everything working to a good standard rather than a few ships being significantly overpowered, and some poor Horn owner might not be able to scan anything at all because we missed it. So we're doing the big wide pass, like Todd said. We've done our first pass on all the systems last week, and every 3 or 4 days we're sort of doing the next iterative pass based on internal and Ibukati feedback on each of those big systems. So like one day we might have the next step tunings for the missiles GUI, and the next day might be the armor and health. The next day is the scanning values. So it's coming thick and fast.
Todd, I don't know if you'll have anything for us, but it's come up too often in chat for me to ignore it. Positional desync. It's been a pretty major problem for a while now, but now for 3.13.
Yeah.
I don't know if Xeno threats seem to exacerbate it or not. What's going on there, and what hope, if any, do we have that some of this might be resolved in 3.14?
I mean, part of it is basically server frame rate, and then part of it is just how much entity counts I think we have and all this stuff. So from my standpoint, I think Clive and his team have constantly been trying to fix those types of things, and then same with Gordon and his team from an actor side. So this is something that's we know is plaguing our game, and we know that it, in particular, with Xenothreat and everything like the big capital ships, it exacerbates it. So obviously with Ninetales, it's a little bit smaller and doesn't have as many of the big capital ships in it. So it's for CIG, I view this as one of our top priorities to try to fix and to constantly strive to make sure that the combat and basically the overall player experience when running around is smooth and solid. So, I can tell you that Chris would say the same thing, Aaron would say the same thing. This is, like, we don't joke around with this. We do constantly try to improve this.
It's like with the AI. Like I've seen some really cool AI behaviors, locally, internally on, in development, and then it gets into the live, and the I don't know. Partially for the reason you mentioned earlier with the streaming and the missing persistence, but also the server tick rate. Yeah, it's just we can't stop developing. Like we have to keep building the game, while this is being worked on by the dedicated teams who are working on this. I know in the chats or in comments there's often this perception that you can only work on one thing at a time, and everybody should be working on this. It's like, Ian, you should be working on server desync. What are you doing, you environment art director? It's like, why aren't you working on server desync? It's like we still need to be developing the game and building our systems and adding new features to the game.
Yes, but desyncing is a major issue. It is a game stopper for a showstopper for a lot of folks. I think one of the bigger problems with desyncing is, I'm going to state the obvious here, it's more of a PU issue than it is a Squadron 42 issue, and a majority of developers are focused on Squadron 42 content and Squadron 42 getting that part 1 of Squadron 42 out the door than they are focused on PU specific issues. So while I do agree that CIG and its hundreds and hundreds of dedicated staff can work across multiple facilities across the world, can work on many different things at once, it is worth mentioning that at least there is some attention that is not being applied to PU-related issues if Squadron 42 is the majority of the focus, even though there is a lot of content that spills over from Squadron 42 into the PU. From the ground up, these items are being made for Squadron 42, and then as the next step would be, we can put this in the PU next. I'm going to leave it there.
It can be challenging when we want this fixed.
That's the best way to put it,
much
challenging.
As the players do. I don't think that's a big mystery. All right, we are almost out of time. Ian, what's going on with Port Olisar? It's like the number two
Nothing
question
at
in the
all.
chat. The number two question in
Nothing
chat
at
has
all.
been about Port Olisar.
Nothing at all.
People want it to be moved. People want it to be a crashed derelict on a planet. What? I think there's one
Okay.
person that wants it to go away.
Okay. Port Olisar has a special place in my heart.
Indeed.
You know, we built it back
Many
in
of
the
ours.
day. Whatever we do with it will be fitting. It's just not going to disappear. I'll just leave it there.
All right.
So how about that Crusader shuttle, John?
Yes. Now, what would it take to actually?
So Port Olisar, before we run off from this topic, Port Olisar needs to go. But what I mean by that is Port Olisar needs to be updated to the modern standards. Think of its own equivalent of a Golden Pass, if not a Port Olisar V2, using the new terminology for power management. This is kind of a standard of what we could call it. It needs to be able to be more AI routing friendly. It needs to have additional services added to it, and the ship pathing is something that I think is going to be continuing to be a problem. Also, larger ships need to be able to dock at PO. So docking collars need to be added if this is going to stay as a large station that is like the hub for everything. Right now, you can't even spawn a reclaimer, an 890 jump at that location, those type of ships. And that's really not acceptable, honestly, for what's kind of like a top tier biggest station in the whole system type attitude. It's just not anymore. The stations that are above Lorville, that are above Area 18, that are above New Babbage are good examples, and future Orison are good examples of, well, sorry, Orison's a bad example, but the other ones are excellent examples. The stations are good examples of probably what we'll see out of PO. No, it won't look that way. We will still keep the identity of PO. But I would not be surprised if PO gets moved above Orison. I would not be surprised. This is speculation now. Speculation. And I would not be surprised if it gains docking collar capabilities. And that's much less speculation, just a necessity in order to keep PO and as a top dog location that is able to handle a lot more things. And also, don't forget, refinery decks need to be added. There needs to be the equivalent of a shopping mall added to PO. So I think you will wake up from PO. It will feel like PO. You will go downstairs to get your ship in a large system, a large room like that you already have in the centralized locations. Don't be surprised, though, if there's docking collars added. And don't be surprised if you can jump on an elevator and go to a refinery deck instead of just go to that little kiosk at the back of the ship spawn central room, and mysteriously you can just click there and your refinery work is done. I do not think that's going to stay. And delivery missions, there'll probably be a larger administration area. The shops will probably be switched over to food, and then those shops will be moved down on an elevator to another location. So in its spirit, PO would stay, but I suspect there's a lot of internal discussions right now at CIG about what exactly PO V2 will look like, Golden Pass, PO, whatever you want to call it. And also, speculation territory again, would it be sitting above Orison in direct support of the of this planetary high atmosphere location, a lot like the other major stations in the Stanton system? Now, it's possible they won't do that. It's possible to keep PO right where it's at. And one of the reasons is there is a distinct possibility that the Javelin and the Hull D, the Hull E will be able to dock at Orison. Orison was stated to be the builder of all the Crusader ships, and in lore, Crusader has the Jupiter, a capital class carrier, more of a civilianized carrier, but a carrier, and has these huge barges that are just zipping around in the atmosphere above Crusader. Crusader also has a weird atmosphere, and it's in the high atmo. It's entirely plausible ships not supposed to go into normal atmosphere will be able to go into this location. Also, that might be why the UAE Navy was so keen on it. Aside from production, like welding and acetone cutting and being able to breathe while they're building these big ships in lower gravity, it may also allow capital class ships to go there. Obviously, the UE fleet is almost all capital ships, and capital ships carrying smaller ships and supported by smaller ships. So it would certainly make sense that a former UEE outpost would be a production facility and repair facility would be built to handle capital class vessels of that caliber of ships of the line. So we'll see if that's the case. And if that's the case, then PO would not be needed as much to support Orison, because Orison is the equivalent of a space-based but breathable atmo, low gravity location. Time will tell. We'll see if that's the case. I really wish that was one of the questions that was upvoted. We'll see.
No, what would it take to get it?
You only have one of them, Olisar or that shuttle.
I think you should just do a flying LSR.
A player-controlled Olisar.
Just a cockpit in there. Yeah.
All right. Actually, let's see. Did Todd Pappy get a crime stat for stealing that parking meter behind him?
Nope, I bought it.
You bought a parking meter?
Yeah, it's a good talking piece. Well, and then my wife's got all of her Lego stuff as well, so.
We've got a couple here. We got a couple more Ninetales lockdown questions. So, will the Ninetales phases run on all servers simultaneously, like at the same time, or will each have its own scenario? I know there's been a lot of comments I've seen about folks in Australia or folks outside the Pacific time zones or the Austin time zones. Like, will these ever run in times that I can play, and stuff like that?
I mean, as far as I know, they're running across all servers simultaneously. And then basically it does have a time clock that it just reoccurs. And so, I mean, ideally, and I think it reoccurs, usually we look at something every 2 to 3 hours or something like that. So we want to make sure that it does reoccur multiple times throughout the day, because technically we think of our days in game as basically 3 to 4 hours. I think it's 3 hours that we look as kind of a 24-hour period. So we want to make sure that all players can experience this across the board, no matter where they're at within the planet right now.
Gotcha. That's not you saying that this will run every single day of the quarter or whatever.
No.
It's just that
No.
on the days when it does run,
Correct.
it should cycle through. Okay.
Correct.
So what we're looking at right here is a very good point. We have viewers. I've run into a lot of viewers from Germany, surprisingly. Thank you guys. Shout out to you, wonderful backers and community members from Germany. That's really awesome. I've also had a fellow from the UK who reached out to me, and of course a lot of US and Canada folks that I've spoken with through comments, through Discord discussions, through community-based discords and such, which is mainly the places I hang out at. And I would say that it is very exciting to me that the time zones are not an issue. I realize that in previous events they've been less considerate to that, but the sales have shown that by timing the waves, even places like Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia have been able to take part in the waves for rare ships. And I believe that will be a sign of what's to come for events. And these type of questions are still good to ask, though, to remind our pillars here that, especially the bottom half of the screen, that time zones are very critical, and to think about all backers and what their needs are, both for their ships and for their play styles, their play experience. And they should be able to take part in these events. I have personally had, anecdotally, friends and org members and such that have told me that they were not able to play the best part of Xenothreat, for example, because it was only like 2 days long or something, or less. And then it was on to like hauling again or something. Being able to have these events, multiple stages across entire patch cycles, and also making them constantly occurring is a very good thing, People should have excitement things to log into, and be able to contribute to different things, and then also contribute as much as possible.
People asking about pico
And not have
balls.
to
I
do
don't
it at
know
like
if Ian
3 in the
even knows
morning
about
for
the
them.
pico balls. That was something I worked out with Eddie. Ian, do you know about the pico balls?
What about them?
Do you know where they're at?
I know they're in.
Okay. People still haven't found them. I've been waiting. I've been waiting
They're-
patiently.
They're in.
All right.
Did we get that one on that one on Orison for you? Did we get that in? The one just for you?
Nick was working on it, but he went on paternity, so I don't know. I'd have
Yeah.
to wait. All right, guys, that's it. That's our show. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this. I have to give a little extra special thank you for John Crew, because he was a last-minute add-in there. So thank you for moving your schedule around and jumping in. There are people I can count on in this place, and these are three of my absolute favorites. ISC is on hiatus, everybody. We're off. We're not back again until July 20-something or other. So you can just keep watching the old episodes over and over again if you want. We'll be back next Friday with an episode of Calling All Devs with core gameplay director Richard Tyrer. We're going to talk all about player healing and hacking and all kinds of stuff coming in Alpha through 15. So stay tuned for that. And of course, remember to keep checking up on the robertsspaceindustries.com website. That's where all the information about when 314 moves to PTU and what wave and when you can get in, and you can start flying around Orison for yourself, because it is quite a treat. So Ian, Todd, John, thank you so much. I'm Jared. I'll talk to you later, everybody. See ya. Bye. Which one does this? It's that one.
Ciao, guys.
Okay, well, honestly, I would say that there's a lot to chew here, but I'm going to keep this analysis extremely limited. It's been a long journey. Thank you for keeping with me on this one. If you made it this far, do the usuals and be sure to add in the comments, discussion, or private feedback. Feel free to combo me about different topics that you saw in this video and about how they'll impact your gameplay. I think there's a lot here. It's unfortunate to hear that a few things have been pulled at the last minute. Surrender mechanics, rewording of capacitors, the co-pilots not being able to utilize capacitors effectively. Just off the top of my head, Orison space whales, unfortunately, for some folks in the audience. But we've learned a lot, we've gained a lot, and catch you in the next one.